ever look back at, say, your picture from your college or your high school days? You ever look back? Some look back and they say, wow, I had hair then. Or things were a little higher in life, or whatever. But you know that things do change, but not dramatically, but they do change. But if you read, I brought this, we just finished music, but this is my introduction to the message, complete book of hymns. If you read some of these songs in here, it will give you an idea of what has changed in Christendom. Just in, this is something that was copywritten in 49. I think it was actually written earlier than that. So we'll call it the last 60 or 70 years. Now, I've kind of sung along with this periodically, this song when it plays. Sometimes I'll sing along. Don't you dare play it on the network. You know, by that warning, you think it's going to be something outrageous, but it's a mansion over the hilltop. Because here are the words. I said, my, how things change. This could never really be sung in a charismatic or evangelistic church today, especially not those that are preaching get the benefits now. Our Stanley's words, I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. Now, today's preaching is, I want my gold and my silver line here, because the preacher told me that's what I was going to get now. I could go and break into my preacher voice now and tell you that you can get it now. Do a little breathing, heavy breathing in between so it sounds good. You know, take the microphone and just breathe real deep into the microphone. Get it now. All right. But that goes contrary. You know, when you read these things, you read what the people had in mind 50, 60, 70 years ago, and the church has just gone crazy and strayed so far away. The refrain to this song, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where I'll never grow old, and someday yonder will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold. Now, you know, I think to myself, I'm preaching a series of messages right now, hung up on this one Greek word, kleronomia, for inheritance or heir. And I'm thinking there'll be some people who will listen to this and it will have absolutely no effect. It will be like water slipping through the fingers. It will have no effect whatsoever. Because Christianity today, I hate to say this, but the whole focus is on the get it now. And I'm not saying that we are not to have abundant life in this life, but our main focus, I tagged my Bible. If you want to look at all the orange stickers that are sticking out, that's just New Testament references to inheritance, clear references where it says inheritance, heir. Tell me that there is something that awaits me, that I am a part of, that is greater than anything I can obtain in the now. Now, I know that is not popular preaching. I know there'll be people, even in the sanctuary, I pray to God not. But there will be some that came expecting, how can I solve your financial problems today? You know, there's a new Christian financial guru born, seems like every month, and if you turn on TV, you'll see them at different hours telling you how to resolve your monetary issues. And they've got, you know, this one guy's got fancy hairdo, and he's got all the lingo, and it sounds real great until you start listening, and it's nothing more than carnival barkers that are just manipulating poor people. And whether God prospers you, it will not be, I'm sorry, God can prosper you by any means, but whether he prospers you, it will not be by manipulation or tapping on your greed, because that is innate in all of us. He doesn't need to use those methods to prosper you. Usually when God prospers, you know God's prospering, because he's already gotten you to the point where you've lost everything. And then it's like, well, I have nothing else left, God. And then things start going good again, because that's the way God does it. But what I'm saying is, I want the focus to be clear. And the danger, because I think this is my second or third week here, that some will hear and just kind of randomly go off and we'll gather. But if rightly understood, and if I believe we are beginning to get different dynamics. Last week we looked at Hebrews 6:12, where I talked about those, don't be sluggish, don't be lazy. But you follow in the footsteps of the fathers that have come before, which we'll get to in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, who through faith and long-suffering, they obtained the inheritance of the promises. And so when I come back to this, I actually did a festival on Monday night and reached into what I call a giant of the faith. I brought his work with me because I'm going to read from it again today, to just kind of set some more dynamics. We can then see Christ, in the opening of Hebrews, Christ being the heir of all things. And as I said, some people will hear this and they will not get excited. They're still tied up in the earthly anxieties. I'm not telling you that once you start reading this, the things that are plaguing you are going to go away or become less. In fact, they may indeed become heightened because your focus is now on the things eternal. But I want to read straight through the first chapter. I'm going to make a point about something to tell you what the author of this book of Hebrews so brilliantly all the way through the book is going to make sure he is definitely dinning in something, which I am going to just take license on and din away too. So here we go. Hebrews 1, God, who at sundry times in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. Remember, we made the correction. There is no his, and it is a, believe it or not, indefinite, if you will, not definite article, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, which has been my focus. So we have Christ, superior to the prophets of old, considered, as we know, and revealed to be a prophet himself, but superior than the prophets of old. He is the last revelation concerning the things of God. There is not going to be another revelation after Christ of God. So he's appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who being in the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person. We looked at those words already. Character is one of those important words. And upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high. Now, have you note there was no chapter and verse? So if you're looking at, in your King James, if you're looking at semicolons and so forth, that should be just, it's one continuous thought that's going to go on here. Being made so much better than the angels. Can't wait to translate this verse. He hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. We'll get to that when we get there. For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. So now we have not just Christ being superior to the prophets and as the last revelation, but now we have Christ superior to the angels. Of which of the angels did he say at any time, Thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee? And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And I love the genius of what's going on here, because an idea is being enforced that will go straight through the book. And again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, And let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels he saith, Who maketh his angels spirits, and his ministers a flame of fire? But unto his Son he saith, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore God, even thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. Lots of stuff we need to translate here. And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and they all shall wax old, as doth a garment, and as a vesture thou shalt fold them up, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, thy years shall not fail. But to which of the angels saith he at any time, Sit on my right hand, until I make thine enemies thy footstool? Are they Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? You can see how many times we've seen the word heir, inheritance. But here's the more important thing. When you get into the second chapter begins, therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Now, if you were reading this in the Greek, what you would see, and that's why I said there is no chapter and verse, once you get through what we're referring to as the first chapter, the second chapter, I'm using air quotes, opens in the Greek by saying, on account of this, or because of this, which throws you back into what was just said. Christ's superiority to the prophets, Christ's superiority to the angels, Christ's position given to him. None of the angels were given that position, but Christ alone. On account of all of what has just been said, chapter 2, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we've heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Now, I said some of you may have in your margin the opening of chapter 2 saying, running out as leaking vessels. Anybody have that in their margin? Who's a leaky vessel? Show me your hand. Okay, it's a couple of you. But I'd like to give you a pictorial image of something which will, again, push us back. We're not leaving the first chapter. It'll push us back into that which I'm focusing on. On account of this, on account of the fact that Christ is so much more than, Christ is better than, and the writer will go on to enforce this idea through other means and methods. But on account of this, we should pay attention. Right there's an admonition for us. Why? Because that word that at any time we should let them slip, I want you to think of rushing waters that can catch you in the flow and pull you away, because that Greek word is extremely poetic in its nature. And I lifted a quote from F.B. Meyer. He said, life's ocean is full of currents, any one of which will sweep us past the harbor mouth, even when we seem to be near, can carry us far to sea. It is the drift that ruins men. That current that can take us away, even though we think we're so close. And first, in the mindset of this church, the ones that would be hearing this book of Hebrews, reading or hearing, that admonition to forgive the word, pay more attention. Because, as I just quoted from F.B. Meyer, it's easy to be here and hear and still get caught up in a current and be swept away. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, there's a lot of preachers out there that they absolutely will not say that. Because they'll go and quote passages out of John saying, if you're in the Father's hand, you can't be plucked out of the Father's hand. But let me tell you something. The current of life, and I've been in a few real storms. I'm talking about real, this is not poetry now. I've been in a couple of real doozers. And you can be at the mercy, we'll call it of nature, or of the forces of God. But once you're in it, it can completely make you lose sight of everything else. I was once crossing the Caribbean, going from San Martin over to Anguilla. And I've never seen waves as big as that, and I've seen lots of big waves. I've never seen waves as big as that, and I was in a very small craft that came to pick me up. It wasn't the ferry, it was a very small craft, and it was open. And as those waves came up, all I could do was look up, see the waves, and think, I'm out of control. I have no power here. Now, I'm using this as an exaggeration to get this in your mind. There's a point before you get caught up in that where you put the brakes on. Now I'm speaking spiritually. And this is the admonition that was being given here. So I don't want us to rush by or get caught up with somehow we have to race past this. But rather, I want to take the time, because I think it's important enough that we, as the writer says, give earnest heed to this concept of inheritance. Why? Because as we looked at last week, and I don't want to preach last week's message, but through faith and long-suffering, gives me the correct understanding that my pilgrimage here is not going to be easy. Paul writes elsewhere and says, fight the good fight of faith. Faith is never seen as a spiritual massage parlor. It is seen as the Greek word exactly conveys it. Agonize the good agony. Fight the good fight is agonize. It's agonizing to faith. Now, I'm sure there are easier ways. This comes back to my opening comments. There's easier ways to get something done. But if you're going to do it God's way, He gives you the roadmap right here. And He says it's by faith and long-suffering. Now, a different dimension of this word inheritance needs to be looked at. As I said, we're going to give the more earnest heed. We're going to pay attention to what's being said. So to do that, we've seen the how-to, if you will. The inheritance comes by faith and long-suffering. Now I want to discuss some of the qualities, we'll call them inherent qualities, that are part of this inheritance, which we will turn to 1 Peter in the opening chapter to read, and then I will take up a little bit of what I did on festival. Because if one desires to really know, if a person really desires to know what it is we are anticipating. Now, some people talk about heaven. It's just a bubble. It's just a great giant bubble. Oh, I so want to say something, but I'll just get myself in trouble. You know the people that have this obsession with cherubic baby figures, and it's all part of heaven. You know, in heaven, their depiction is that heaven can be, you're going to be floating around with these little cherubic babies. By the way, none of them have diapers on. But you've seen these people. They have like an obsession with that. I remember seeing one of those, and it kind of gave me the creeps. But what I'm trying to get us to put some reality, even though it is almost impossible for us to comprehend this concept of our inheritance. I want to put some substance here that when you talk about the concept of inheritance, you're able to say, well, I know by Hebrews 6:12, this is how it's obtained. And by what Peter 1, beginning at verse 4, but I'll start reading at verse 3, what Peter says, giving us some of these qualities that are not a definition in total, but they give us some inerrant, we'll call them characteristics of what it is we are looking toward. So 1 Peter, let me begin at verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to His abundant mercy hath begotten us again, remember that, anageses, from above, unto a lively hope, or living hope, by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. From an inheritance. There's our word. Kleronomia. An inheritance. Now, here Peter goes on to describe that. And somewhere in here, I've got some good Greek writing for some of you that may want to know. He gives three important words. The first one is incorruptible. Incorruptible. This very interesting word, aphtharton, which I had to look, even though I read it from Dr. Toger's work, I had to go read it, look it up, and get the full description. So this word in the Greek would be undecaying, basically, in essence, or continuous. We could talk of the concept, this word is attached to immortality, not, because there's an A at the front, so it puts in reverse, not shriveling, or not being ruined, defiled, destroyed, all right? And so, as we have the translation incorruptible, the first word, gives us a dimension of what this inheritance, characteristically speaking, what is involved. And I love the fact that when you try to think in your mind of what is uncorruptible around you, you know that there is nothing around you in this earth that fits that description. Incorruptible. There isn't anything. There's not a thing. Now, I marvel at that because when I taught through this passage, and we taught through the whole book of this 1 Peter, really didn't jar me as much as when I went back and started digging to find details about this inheritance. As I said, the means and how it's obtained, but now some characteristics. And that started my mind thinking, with the help from Dr. Tosha's writing, of, is there anything that I can think of in this world that comes under the undecaying and endless in years category? And it's rhetorical. I'm going to ask you because you'll come up with the same answer as me. And this is not double jeopardy. There is nothing. Not a thing in this world. So that's one part of the description. Undefiled. There are only 3 words I really want to focus on, and they are all beginning with A, which kind of tells you that negative particle, or putting the word in reverse. Here's another one of these, amienton. So we've got another reverse. And let me put the other one, as they kind of look similar. And this word actually looks like a hamartia word. Looks like it could be a distant relative. So we have here 1, 2, and 3, and they're all A words. So we have aphtharton, amienton, and amaranton. They all kind of sound the same, but they're different words. Amienton, unsoiled, undefiled, related to the words not sullied or tainted, not contaminated. Again, I ask you the same thing. Can you think of anything in this world that you may possess that it has not been contaminated? All right. And last word, see, this seems to be quite easy. And the last word, which Peter is translating as, or the King James rather is translating as that fadeth not away, is one Greek word which is, unfading is a good way to describe it, perpetual, to not pass away, or a fire that never is extinguished. Can you think of anything? I didn't think so. So this is why it becomes clear to me that if there's nothing that we can wrap our minds around, that we can tangibly conceive of, then there's no way for us, if we're not reaching the boundaries and stretching our spiritual mind, there's no way for us to even really begin trying to comprehend what this inheritance is. You see, these words actually triggered, and looking at 1 Peter, triggered something that made me stop and say, here's the greatest point. Prior to looking at this word, I have an inheritance. What is it I'm getting? I'm so excited. What am I getting? But I want you to think about this. These words can describe, we cannot describe God in full because that's blasphemy, but these are words that do describe some part of God's nature. Let's go back and see what I just said. Those words are undecaying, in essence, continuous, immortal, not shriveling or withering away, not spoiled, not defiled, not contaminated, a fire that cannot be extinguished. What does the Bible say? God is a consuming fire. I think when I started to look at these, it dawned on me that, yes, that's why there's no interest in this, because if you only stop at the surface and read the words, of course, great, I got an inheritance. But when you start to dig these words, you find that The method and means of getting there is not through, as I said, living your best day and getting it all now. It's through that reaching for the promises and leaning on God's word and long-suffering. And then I've got dimensions of what this characteristic, what this looks like. So I'm going to read, for the benefit of those that did not listen on festival, I am going to read a little bit, some highlights from Dr. Tozer's work. And probably the most important thing that I can say is the reason why I started pointing your direction to the opening of chapter 2. Take heed that you don't let this just rush by you, or that you don't just rush by it. Because just in the time that I've spent camping out on this, it's made me see, even for me, someone who has solid faith, and I'm usually not fussing about these things over here, it's made me really realize, taking some spiritual inventory, that as much as my eyes are fixed, they could be fixed a little bit more on Him. And this has given me the stirring to say, well, wait a minute. As much as I think I'm excited about an inheritance, I'm excited about the things that accompany it. I'm excited about the discussion of probing a little deeper to know that what awaits me can never be changed in its nature. It is unchangeable. This is from the Tozer Pulpit, Volume 5. And I'm going to read because no one says it better than Dr. Tozer. So he says, I want to ask you what any man can possess in this world that has about the quality of incorruptibility. According to the meaning of the Greek language, the word incorruptible expresses the quality of undecaying in essence and endless in years. That which cannot be corrupted is undecaying in essence and, I suppose, only secondarily endless in years. I ask you, and I ask you, as he asked his readers in congregation then, I ask you, is there anything on this earth that can properly and accurately be described as incorruptible, that does not decay in its essence and is not endless in its sphere? Now, hopefully, some of you today are going to go, I feel like I just better than the lottery. Hopefully, because, I've been talking about this for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But for some, it hasn't sunk in yet. See, I look at myself as just a crusty old sin-filled container, broken, just kind of, my pilgrimage is, I don't know, I don't want to call it pilgrimage. I want to call it mental boot camp in every dimension that you can possibly imagine. And then I think to myself that all of this, which I've been focusing on, the focus must be there. But I've got something, it's unsearchable. It is the meaning of this inheritance that somebody like me, and I know you're saying the same thing about yourself, that somebody like you is a part of that which you can't even fathom. I mean, it's bad enough to talk about the fact that God washed my sins away and I'm white as snow and that I'm saved and that He loves me. He loves me. That's almost crazy enough right there. But then to be told that something that is this perfect, undefiled, incorruptible, that does not fade away, awaits for me, that, by the way, Paul in Ephesians says, has already been implanted in me already. All right. Don't believe you for a minute, Pastor Scott. You're delusional. But I like the question that he asks here. Because the Bible should make us sometimes stop in our tracks and ask a question. What on earth is incorruptible? I don't care what, I started this series by talking about if you have a relative that's deceased, whatever they can leave you is still corrupted. You can say, well, I'll go wash it. Incorruptible is a word that cannot be applied to anything, to any earthly thing. Not a thing. So I want you to go down this pathway with me. When I talk to you about this inheritance, I don't want you to think, I got a mansion just over the hilltop. That's great. But that's just another piece of property to worry about. And why would I want to worry about another piece of property when I'm going to be with the Lord and the Lord's portion, and you are the Lord's portion? Same thing. So now we're talking about something that it's beyond. It's beyond the good songs and the streets of gold. We're talking about, even though we cannot comprehend it in its fullness, we're talking about something so deeply profound because we have no knowledge of what something that is not corrupted is. There's no way that you or I could know what that means. We define the word, we speak the word, but not one of us has known the concept of something that has not been corrupted. And I know I'm not speaking in other languages. Some of you are looking at me like, well, maybe you are. Incorruptible is a word that cannot be applied to any earthly thing. There is nothing we can know down here that is undecaying in its essence and endless in its years. Now, I love the fact that he goes on to describe a few of these things in perfect clarity. I just want to highlight some of the things that he says. He says, incorruptible, without decay, and endless in years. That is why I've had to say that this quality describing our heavenly inheritance is precisely the quality that distinguishes it from all earthly things. That's a good place to start. The second one of our words, amianton in the Greek, undefiled. The question we must ask ourselves immediately is this: what earthly treasure do any of us possess that is safe from defilement? Can you think of any? That's, this is the moment I'm hoping that some lights come on where you go, yes, I get it now. I get why she's so excited because, I've been robbed, I've been mugged, I've had everything, there's been lots of things in my life happen. And there's nothing worse than having things, possessions being taken away from you, whether they're seized, whether you're robbed, whether somebody mugs you. But then to think of something that you have that can never be taken away from you, that will never be, as he puts it so brilliantly, safe from defilement. Now, Dr. Tozer lived in a time when the talk about money, people focused on money and money was evil. Now, I have to admit that, not properly understood, money is the root of all evil, can be the root of all evil if money is your God, and if money comes between you and God, because Jesus said you cannot serve God and mammon. And he uses the example of even that which, say you went to the bank and some crisp bills. Well, he didn't say this, but I'm saying this. Some real crisp bills come out of the machine. The ones that look like somebody was back there and just finished blow drying them and they're so smooth. But even those have been defiled. Don't think you're the first one to touch them. Hey, think about that. There is nothing that has not been defiled. And then, lastly, he speaks of this word unfading, that fadeth not away. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit, because Peter actually goes on to speak of that in another dimension. I don't know if what I'm going to say will actually penetrate, but if you think about the words that are being highlighted here that give you some characteristic of the inheritance, you know that it's not like anything that you could possibly wrap your mind around in the earthly realm. And I think just to go by it, whoosh, is to say, wait a minute, what I have now, join these words that I've just given you and join them carefully to concepts that pertain to God, and then in your mind jump ahead to what Paul says in Ephesians, that we have been given the arrabon, the part deposit of this inheritance has been given to us, has been placed in us for our faith. So, although we have not known incorruptible and undefiled and things that fadeth not away, we begin to, this is the beginning of it, is by that Spirit placed in us, the mind, the Spirit, desires to know, I want to know about this thing. And the greatest thing that happens here is that, like I said, I taught through this, and it really didn't hit me until now. I've come back to these verses. That as Peter describes these, he also says, it's reserved for you. Reserved in heaven for you. Now, in LA, usually you have to, even to come here, you have to make a reservation. You want to go to a nice restaurant, you got to make a reservation. Something has been reserved for you, though. And I looked up that one word, to guard on by keeping an eye on. That means God's watching over you. And the next word in this passage, which is who are kept by the power of God. When I taught through this, I focused on that word, garrisoned, as in military protection. So, now some of you are still going, well, okay, I get the fact that she's happy about an inheritance. She's really happy about it. But you don't send what are those give me an armored company, one of those armored companies, Brinks. You don't send a Brinks truck to go and collect from place to place if what you're collecting is paper cups and recyclable items. You know what I'm saying? So when I read this, guarded by, get reserved for, and garrisoned by God, I'm thinking God has some heavy-duty power given to those which earlier in this Peter's writing says, called and chosen, elect. And we go through life down here rather undisturbed about the whole idea that something that we have not seen the likes of, undefiled, unfading, incorruptible, not only belongs to me through faith and long-suffering, but has already been deposited in me. Are you starting to see it's almost like turning different dimensions, and you're beginning to fill out a concept, which is why I said to you the first message I did, I took a whole dump and put all these concepts in front of you, and now we're sorting through. And some concepts should begin to crystallize, that this isn't just some, whoopee Christian happy land, and we just dream about it, and we're great enthusiasts here. But rather, there's something that has been promised to us that no mortal man or woman can even imagine, the quality and characteristic of which we're just given a little glimpse right here and told that it's reserved and garrisoned by the power of God for us, to us. Now, there's the flip side to this. Let me give you the flip side, because I'm going to try and hit this all, even though I'm running a little late. I'm going to try and hit this all. So by different patterns, you can see God pays attention to what we do in hearing His Word. Remember, I opened this by reading that opening of the second chapter to you, that we take the more earnest heed to not let these things just whoosh, rush by us, and that we will not be swept away either, thinking we're so close and yet we've actually drifted so far. The admonition is against drifting away. But there's a flip side to this, because now I'm still talking about inheritance. I've talked to you about the getting there, some qualities. Now let me give you the bad side, because I would normally give you the bad news first. I'm going to give you the bad news last. There's a warning in Hebrews that most people get hung up on regarding Esau. Be not like that profane person Esau. For a morsel of bread sold his birthright. You've visited that passage many times, and people have scratched their heads. And what on earth did the writer mean by writing this? For a morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. Now, there'll be a lot of people that get hung up on why did the writer use this, if you're familiar with the story. I don't want to get hung up on the story. I want to just say this. The warning is, be not like that profane person Esau. And what is profane? Not discerning spiritual things. So while I'm talking to you about this inheritance, and for some it's really tough, because you're going to leave here and you're going to go back into your cubbyhole of the universe where everything is flying at you, and you might say, well, this is the mentality of our day, how can this work for me now? But the perspective should be that the now is quite small. The endurance, the long suffering, the things you have to go through are quite small temporally compared to eternally. Oh, come back and tell me that next week. What I'm trying to tell you is that the wonderful side, the delight, is that if we'll take heed and we won't rush by things and we won't drift away, we'll keep our thoughts and minds focused on what the writer's saying, and I've given you the dimensions out of 1 Peter, but then the flip side is, be not like that profane person Esau, not discerning spiritual things. And there'll be many people that they will have heard me today or the last couple of weeks, and they'll say, but so what? Well, then the warning is for you. Because while we live in the momentum of get it now, obtain it now, have it now, I'd rather forego the now, the obtaining in the now. Because what I'm uncovering about the future and the deposit of what has already been placed in me regarding that future tells me that it's something in a human frame I cannot even fathom, and neither can you. Now, I want to know about my inheritance. I want to know what I'm going to get. Some people think they're going to get to heaven. Oh, boy. Some people think, there should be a period there. Some people think they're going to get to heaven, period. But some people think they're going to get to heaven. See how periods can be fun. Some people think they're going to get to heaven, and it's going to be boring. Some people think that when you get to heaven, I've heard heaven described as a place where, as I said, floating cherubic figures, and people are floating all over the place, happy. Oh, boy, yeah, I agree with you totally on that. But what? Somebody used an explicative back there. It's okay, we'll pray for you later. But what I'd like to say is that if we as children of God are really looking at this word to understand the fullness and the last revelation, which Christ did indeed reveal, then two things bookend this. The method of getting there, forgive me for saying it, the method of getting there through faith and long-suffering, some of the characteristics, those three that I've given you out of 1 Peter, the concept out of Hebrews 12, an admonition that we should just not be profane, we should discern the spiritual things. And then perhaps maybe the most intense one of all, which, as I take this in a very serious light, you have Paul, the Apostle Paul, standing before Agrippa. And he's recounting what happened to him in the telling of how he was going along and he hears a voice. Have you ever really taken the time to read that passage? Because it's amazing what Christ, he's recounting to the king, what Christ said to him. Turn there with me, because I think you'll be like me, you like sometimes read a little sloppy, and then you go, wow, that's in there? Okay. This is out of the Lord's mouth then, because Paul is standing before Agrippa, Acts 26. All this is to make a very important point. If the Lord said it in this way, I think we ought to do what the writer of Hebrews says, pay the more earnest heed or attention to these spiritual concepts. So Paul is standing before Agrippa. He's telling him what happened. And Paul, who was Saul, he hears a voice in the Hebrew tongue saying to him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It's hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And I said, Who art thou, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in which I will appear unto thee, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee, to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Now, when you start putting all of these scriptures together, you can understand it should give you something to get a little bit more excited about. Commission to Paul, which he indeed carries out, which I have referenced several of the passages that he's talking about. And on your own, if you'll take the time to go and tag all of those references to this particular Greek word, you find even James mentions it once. That's pretty impressive right there for the guy who didn't hear anything, but he does mention that. Just saying, all you Jamesians out there. But here's the point, and I want to drive this point as much as possible to the place where, if asked, a year ago, if somebody said, tell me about the inheritance, you might not be able to give great detail because we have little given to us. And paradoxically, we've not even looked at the little that's been given to us until this time. So now it starts to take on a different dimension. It's not the way the bulk of Christianity has said, feel good, act good, be good. Those fading experiences of life that make you have to, we're using another word, long-suffering, perseverance. You keep striving, you keep pushing through, and it is obtained, the promise is obtained that way, inheritance. The dimensions and qualities that the ones who have no interest in, I cannot make you interested, nor can you make somebody else interested in these concepts. Hence the warning, be not like Esau, that profane person. And I'm just building on this, that Christ commissioned to Paul, the very last words are to tell the people of their part in what they will receive, sanctified by those who have faith in him. So for me, I don't want to rush through. I don't want to be so quick to pass by this and say, oh yeah, you know what? You all know what's coming your way. Don't you? Some of this nervous laughter there. No, we don't have a confessional here. That will hit you later. You can't remove all the Catholicism, but you can remove most of it. But but I think the greatest thing that can be said is that if you were to put Hebrews, if you were to superimpose Hebrews and 1 Peter, you find something quite interesting. Remember, I just said to you, how is this obtained? And I just gave you the path out of Hebrews 6:12. If you keep reading that opening chapter of 1 Peter, you see this, that we have an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you, or for us, who are kept by the power of God, garrisoned through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. Now, remember what I just said, faith and long-suffering, right? Wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, not your best day now, not your happy smiles, not your, everybody's golden and everybody's happy. And you see why I'm saying to you, and this cannot be said enough, the severity of just passing by and making light versus equipping you and saying, not only Hebrews and 1 Peter are saying the same thing, You have this undescribable gift being given to you. But down here in the meantime, you are going to, through faith, through the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise, honor, and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. So, for all of those who say, well, why should I worry about this in the now? Because the deposit given to you isn't some campfire that the fire is now gone and all you're looking at is smoldering ashes of yesteryear, but rather something that cannot be extinguished. What does the Scripture say about God? He's not changing. Same yesterday, today, and forever. That these principles given to us should say, no matter what goes on, I'm not going to be looking back at, oh, those were the good old days, and boy, we sure had that there, but I'm looking ahead. And knowing that because of the deposit placed in me, the things I'm looking towards, which I cannot completely understand in their fullness, give me an example, give me some taste, if you will, of the heavenly inheritance that does await every child of God. And it's not by works, and it's not some super method here. It's plain and simple. The life down here is ever reaching from one, we'll call it from one calamity to the promise that is for that calamity to another. Not being caught up with the circumstances, but recognizing that this journey and what accompanies it, there is some reward at the end. Now, if you want to have a good field day and start looking up all the other references in the Bible that do not use the word inheritance, or heir, but make mention. They are either parables, they are conceptual ideas that have been conveyed to us. There are so many of these that I don't know why somebody wouldn't be excited to say, yeah, tell me more about this. I want to know more. I want to know what, in the flesh here, what all was left to me in the will. Have any idea? Now, you don't have to be timid about asking, because God has revealed it to us through His final revelation, which is His Word, as the fullness of what we can know. So if you're interested in that, probably discuss that on festival. I would like to move on, but I don't want you to get, I don't want to be just so fast that we rush by something and we don't take the time to say, now wait a minute, there's much more to this than meets the eye. And I'm not in a hurry. I don't want you to think that, because I've said this to you before. I need to sometimes take the mindset, if I never got to talk to you again, which is what I used to tell a lot of the people I would see everywhere, giving talks in different places. If I never see you again, did I convey the most important thing that you could possibly apply and know for your spiritual well-being? And I can answer that today by saying, I told you to keep faithing, that it's going to be a tough trip, and there's something that is uncorruptible, undefiled, and doesn't fade away, that's awaiting for you, that's reserved for you, being guarded for you by the power of God. That's pretty good encouragement to make it through. Keep faithing, folks. That's my message. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.